Surbhi, it's nice to talk to you. I see you are a partner at Y Combinator. You are a successful entrepreneur, and now you're the author of a new book, without a doubt. But honestly, as I'm talking through those titles, they don't do justice to the inspiring story that you tell. Now, I guess that's why you had to put it in a book.
Yeah, I did want to get an example out there of someone who had a lot of doubt, was receiving doubt for others, had self-doubt, but sort of made the decision to push through and keep going. So
Yeah, and I think your subtitle says it all: how to go from underrated to unbeatable.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You certainly had a lot of challenges, but your story really begins with as a teenager, you had a cancer scare, but that cancer scare also inspired you to reimagine healthcare, and it sparked what became a company that you started and eventually sold to Boston Scientific, I believe for $275 million. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. But along the way, a lot of challenges, a lot of near misses, and you learned something with each step of that process. Can we start with something that clearly came out of your book, the role of passion in a startup venture? I don't think passion gets the focus that it really deserves. People sort of roll their eyes when we say, "Oh, it's important to be passionate." Well, no, I think in Surbhi's case, if you weren't passionate about this particular area of healthcare, you would not have pursued it as aggressively as you did. Tell me about passion and entrepreneurship. What does that
mean? Absolutely. Absolutely. When I look back at my high school years and having all of those complex ovarian cysts and, high school's already hard enough, awkward enough for most of us. So layer on top of that, a disease that impacted my ovaries and having to talk about my ovaries to teenage boys, not a lot of fun, not to mention the pain, discomfort, and uncertainty of not knowing if those cysts were cancerous. But still, when I look back on it, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Emerson has this quote that a good indignation brings out all one's powers. And I've just found that to be so true for me, and going through that health scare, it gave me that good indignation. It gave me that passion. And how does that apply to entrepreneurship more broadly? Look, being a founder is hard. There's one obstacle after the other. And so people say, how do you deal with the self-doubt, the uncertainty, the setbacks, that kind of thing? And it's, well, look, if your passion, if your good indignation is stronger, there's more of it than doubt, then that's how you put one foot in front of the other and you keep going, right? Yeah. And so without that passion, without that belief in the product that you're building or the people you're building the product for, there is no entrepreneurship, there is no company.
Exactly, which is why I wanted to raise that issue of passion early on, because it doesn't matter what else we talk about, all of these ways of creating a pitch or a presentation that is more impactful, more likely to get funding, etc. None of that really matters if the entrepreneur and the speaker, the person who is the visible representation of the brand, isn't passionate about the topic. In some ways, it all starts with passion.
Yeah, it all starts with passion. I mean, what gets you going in the first place is passion. What keeps you going is passion. And then a big part of it is attracting other people to the table, right? Other employees, investors. And unless you have that passion and they know it, unless you have that fire in your belly that good indignation gave you, it's much harder to attract people to the table. It's almost like
good indignation. I like that.
Yeah. We all have an instinct for it. We all know when someone we're speaking to has that genuine passion about what they're working on or not,
You certainly had a number of challenges to go through, especially with pitching your idea, which wasn't always successful. In fact, there was one part in the book where you had been turned down by 50 investors. Then you got into a Harvard pitch competition. I think you came in second, so that was good. You felt like you had been that you let people down, but looking back, you realize that, hey, I came in the top 3 and I learned a lot. And then you went through Tim Draper University and you learned more from the pitching process. So I would like for you to explain briefly about your experience with pitch competitions and what you learned about that process, which is so important to aspiring entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was 24 when I started my company, and I think 24 when I entered that Harvard Business School new venture competition. And as a result of being so young, I didn't have a ton of public speaking experience, right? And so being on stage in front of, I think it was a couple hundred people about at the time, was a
Would have
completely
been terrifying for anybody.
Yeah, it was a completely new experience for me, right? And that's another reason, actually, this ties again back to that good indignation, back to that passion. The way that you overcome that fear in that moment, and that fear kind of the whole journey through, is again by refocusing on what brought you to that moment to begin with, right? And even on stage after the competition, people came up to me and told me that passion came through, that energy came through around it, And so a lot of entrepreneurship in the early days is kind of stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping out of what you're used to being able to do something, but also knowing that if you fail, you're going to fail in front of a lot of people, and that's perfectly fine,
And Tim Draper taught you later on in another pitch competition. Tim Draper, the famous venture capitalist, taught you something that you write about in the book. You said, you learned to tell my story and to make a business case at the same time. How do you tell your story and make a business case? I think that's where a lot of people, especially young entrepreneurs, get confused.
Yeah, it's really interesting. At the end of the day, if you're raising venture capital, you should have a big business in mind that you're building, and you should understand the market size. You should understand pricing. You should understand all of the various metrics and business aspects of whatever you're doing. That's absolutely true. And I think for a while, I had this fear that if I talked about my personal story, what brought me to the table, people would think that I must not have a handle on the business side of things. And what Tim taught me to do is actually to be comfortable talking about this scare and why I entered the system of entrepreneurship and wanting to do something in healthcare. And I think that's so important because investors know that in order to see success, you're talking about 8 to 10 years, right? Maybe like minimum 7 in some circumstances. And so what's going to keep the founder in the saddle, right? And so that's why I think it's so important to talk about that personal story and what brought you to the table to begin with, as long as you have all of the business aspects already very well thought out, right? I'm not saying only tell the story or take up too much time with it, but I think it's perfectly fine to mention why it is you find yourself working on what you're working on.
I think people are engaged through story. That's how we connect from one human to another. And that is what gives pitches and presentations their emotion and elevates it to a completely different level, is the combination, like you said, of facts, information. So we have confidence in the entrepreneur and the founder, but also we understand what motivates her day to day and what's going to keep her locked in on that vision. That's why the power of story. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that sometimes it's easy for founders to forget, for example, that investors are just people, and what engages people fundamentally is a story. And if you just go in there and you list facts and there's no substance tying things together, it's very easy to lose your audience,
You also learned the power of simplicity, and you write that simplicity is underrated. Tell us about that.
Oh, man. I think that for a long time, especially in scientific fields, but just generally, if you use big words and acronyms, I think that you are taught to believe that people will then think you are smart.
Yeah.
And in reality, most people, they have an idea of how intelligent they are. And if you're saying something by using long, complicated, scientific jargon or whatever it might be, acronyms about, related to generative AI, and it might make you feel smart, but the other person has zoned out. They're not thinking, oh, I'm so dumb, I can't understand this person, let me ask a clarifying question. They're just thinking, okay, I'm bored. I don't, I couldn't follow what the story is, and therefore I tuned it out. That's what happens to people, especially these days, right? We all know attention spans are going down a little bit. There's instant information at our fingertips all the time. Look, if you can't say your story in a simple way, chances are you lost an audience that maybe would have been more interested if you just use simple language.
And this is coming from someone like yourself who started InVision, who's at InVision Medical.
Yeah.
That is enormously complex under the hood.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Deeply scientific topics now, right? I work with a lot of computational biologists.
Yeah.
We do synthetic biology investing.
And I know this is a hard question, but how do you balance? I guess it's audience dependent. How do you balance simplifying a message, but not making it too simple for the audience that still needs to understand the technology or the medical innovations behind the product and the idea?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So there's two answers, right? One is absolutely knowing your audience and kind of what their expectation is. But the other part of it is to start simple, pay attention to the body language of your audience and the questions they're asking. And if it's evident they want you to go a step deeper, go a step deeper. And sometimes they might signal you the other way. So it's all about knowing as much as you can about your audience beforehand, and then knowing your pitch so well that you're able to read the room while pitching. If you don't know your pitch that well and you're kind of scrambling, what point should I say here? Then you've lost the mind space to focus on the body language of the room, which I think is a big issue, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But investors who know your space really well will guide you to go a step deeper if needed.
And not every investor knows your space very well. I've learned that working with venture capital firms and working with groups of entrepreneurs. And to a person, the investors will often tell me that the entrepreneur or the speaker assumes that everyone in their audience, analysts, financial analysts, bankers, if you're going pre-IPO, they assume that they know more than they actually do.
Yeah.
And so they start in the middle instead of starting at the top. And again, like you said it best. Simplicity is underrated.
Yeah. Keep it simple. Let the audience take you to a deeper level when they're ready. You're there for them at that point, right? You want to make sure that they stay engaged.
Hey, Surbhi, how do you mentor or advise the young entrepreneurs who are going through Y Combinator, especially at the all-important demo day, where they're finally allowed to reveal their ideas and their projects to real investors? That's an important pitch. That's the mission-critical pitch. Do you offer advice and mentorship based on your experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. At Y Combinator, we work extremely closely with founders on not only what their overall fundraising plan should be, but the best way to present their company, the best way to present their story, and it does start with this. Keep it simple. Understand what your 3 or 4 strongest points are about the talk that you're making, about your company. Understand how to kind of weave those points together, so absolutely a big part of what we do is focusing on on fundraising itself, focusing on the story and the pitch deck behind the fundraise.
Yeah, that excellent. And I'm sure you've learned so much from your own experience. What I like about the way you write in Without a Doubt is that you acknowledge that, one, this is hard, and it is difficult to get past your internal doubts and yourself, but you talk very openly about having those doubts and not being naturally comfortable as a speaker and as a presenter. And yet that's the whole point. You can learn to be much more effective, which you did.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the more you do something, the more comfortable you get with it. It's all about practice, you know? And
Mhm.
so I went from, okay, being nervous on stage at, the Harvard Business School pitch competition to not, I speak publicly all the time now. And there's nothing about the audience, the size of the audience, which will
Mhm.
make me too nervous, right? I've actually grown to really enjoy it, So over time, when you put yourself out there, you start learning kind of, what you're good at.
And you have a good story to tell. It's always
Yeah.
good. It's that always helps to have a great story.
Uh,
But that was
Absolutely. Thank
excellent.
you.
So congratulations on all of your success. And are you still, now that you've sold InVision to Boston Scientific, are you still involved with it, or did you sell that off?
No, not at this point. I
Okay.
stayed with
Yeah.
Boston Scientific for 2 years after
Right.
the acquisition,
Hmm.
but now I'm full time at Y Combinator.
And what does Y Combinator give you, and in terms of that satisfaction of working with entrepreneurs, or maybe that's it, giving back to those entrepreneurs? Well, why do you
I,
like working at Y Combinator?
Yeah, I don't think I would have worked for a traditional venture capitalist. What's
Yeah.
amazing about Y Combinator is, yes, we give, $500,000 at the seed stage, which is meaningful, but we also spend 3 months with the company during their earliest company formation
Mm.
times, right? So I
Before
cannot
demo day, before I've
before
seen them
demo
at
day.
demo day.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah, yeah. And it's so it's an honor, honestly, to bear witness to some of the amazing things that these founders are working on,
Wow.
especially in the healthcare space right now. So if I can pass on sort of all of the lessons I learned, which I try to do and without a doubt, right? I talk about fundraising, team building, all, board management, all of these practical things, while also trying to get into the sort of the psychology of a founder and how to manage that, right?
Hmm.
And so if I can do that with these founders, which are working on absolutely game changing, often life saving products, it's extremely fulfilling.
That's why I focus a lot on communication, because how many great ideas never see the light of day because the founder simply was ineffective at presenting that idea.
I really couldn't agree more with that. I truly could not agree more with that. I think that there are so many people, for example, on the tech side of things who would invest in life-saving therapeutics or sciences if the founders were able to describe what they're doing in a straightforward, simple manner, you know? And instead, you can't attract that money that you so desperately need, even though it's sitting on the tech side of things, and these people want to put their money into, you know, world changing sort of scientific innovation, healthcare related innovation. And I think what's missing there is the communication.
Well, Surbhi, thank you for offering your life's lessons in Without a Doubt. Excellent book. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.